Hey everyone, I've been really excited to see everybody's logos popping up all over the place. The video has surpassed 10,000 views, which is amazing. So I thought I would do a little add-on video for you on quilting your logi. So I'm going to show you how to do this today. It's quite easy. I have a very simple technique for getting the straight lines using painter's tape. You can do it on a print, you can do it on a solid, any of the bases will work. If you are going to do it on a piece that has the seam in the bottom, you're going to want to do that part first, sew and top stitch that bottom seam, and then you can pick up where this tutorial starts with your logi pattern pieces cut out. So let's get going. For the quilted exterior, you will need your exterior piece, which could be vinyl or woven. You will need your piece of foam that is cut to 7 by 10.5 inches with the corners snipped to fit on the back of that exterior piece. You'll also need basting spray or glue just to adhere that before we quilt it, and some painter's tape. And you will also need, for finishing up your logi pouch, your lining pieces. Today I'm going to be doing the bound version. You'll need your zipper pulls, double-sided tape, clips, stapler, lighter, thread zapper if you have one, fray check if you're going to be snipping your zipper, and your scissors. First up, grab your exterior piece, and we are going to mark the lines for our quilting. You can do free-form quilting on your exterior if you want to. I am going to do the diamond pattern, so I'm going to be using painter's tape to make sure that I get nice straight lines. I'm going to be using 1-inch painter's tape for mine, and when I draw my lines, I'm going to start from the end here, and I'm going to put the tape every 2 inches, which is going to create a line every 1 inch, and I can sew down either side of the tape. When we're doing the quilting, we're going to do one direction at a time. You can choose just to have the lines going one way and not have the crossover of the lines, or you can quilt one direction and then do your tape again and quilt the other direction the way that I'm going to. The measurement from this side here to this side here is about 12 inches. So if we do it every 2 inches, they should line up pretty evenly. So starting 1 inch from this side, I'm going to take my painter's tape, and I'm going to line that up parallel to the edge using this ruler as a guide. I like to use a 2-inch ruler for this. You can use a 1-inch ruler, but using the 2-inch ruler, I can line up my next line of painter's tape from this edge here. If I was using my 1-inch ruler, I would do it like this. So placing that again, my tape is just slightly under 1 inch. So I'm just going to center it under that 1-inch mark on that ruler, and just make sure you're consistent. Even if it goes from slightly narrower to slightly thicker, it'll still be even. But we're going to be sewing on the inside of the 2 lines of painter's tape, so that will account for that slight narrowing here. You want for this section for your tape to go all the way to the end so that you can continue your quilting on this side here too. My tape's just a little bit short, so I'm just going to get a little tiny piece and add that to the end there. And then move the ruler over again, line it up the same way. The bold line of my ruler is just past where that painter's tape is. And then just finishing up here. And then you can just check on your mat to make sure that you're happy with the placement of that tape, where your lines will be. Make any adjustments. The beauty of the painter's tape is that it comes off very easily and it doesn't leave any residue on your vinyl or damage it at all. Now, before we go over and sew these lines, we just need to make sure that we don't have any bits hanging over the edge, which obviously we do. So you can just tear those or even fold them in, just so they don't stick to your sewing machine, and we'll just be able to peel those off easily afterwards. Just be careful, you might sew through them if you fold them into the line where your stitches are going to go. But it just tears so easily, so you can just take that off. You don't want it to get stuck to the bed of your sewing machine, especially like these sections here. I will reuse this tape when I go the other way too, so as to not be too wasteful. You could even, if you wanted to, add like a sticker sheet, the backing of a sticker sheet, and reuse it between projects as well. Because it doesn't need to be stuck down too hard, it's just a guide. Okay, so we have all of those lines in place. Now, in order to get the quilted 3D look, we need to put our foam on the back. So flip it over, take your piece of foam and just spray some of that basting spray to it, or glue. I'm not going to fuse it, even though I am using fusible foam. I'm just going to baste it because it's going to be sewn in place. Now, as you can see, the foam doesn't come into these corners here, and when we quilt, we're just going to be going off the edge of that foam as we make those quilting lines. So just take care that your stitches don't need the tension adjusted to keep it nice and tight on the top. So we're going to go over to the sewing machine. I'm going to be using a walking foot to do my quilting, and we're just going to sew straight down either side of this painter's tape using a long stitch length. I will backstitch at the beginning and at the end of my stitches, and then when we're done, I'm going to do fray check as well so that they don't unravel at all. Couple of things to consider before we start. You may want to put a new needle in, since we're going to be doing a lot of top stitching today, to make sure that you're getting great stitches. You want your needle to be nice and sharp. I am using a thicker thread than what I normally sew with for construction, so I'm using a Mara 70 thread from Gutterman, and make sure that your bobbin has enough thread in it. As I said, I've got my walking foot on. I'm going to be using a longer stitch length. I like 4 on my machine. You may like something different. I'm going to set my needle to the center position, and then using the little notch in the center, I'm going to line that up with the edge of the tape here and just sew straight down one side. I'm just going to start in the middle and work out, and then work the other way. And as I said, I'm going to backstitch. Try to keep that backstitching in what will be your seam allowance if you can. So there is my first line of stitches here. I'm just going to continue doing that. Consider when you are doing your stitches if you want to use a contrasting thread, or if you want to use a thread that blends into your fabric. You can decide based on your level of confidence in your top stitching. Also, if you know your machine sometimes skips stitches or has uneven stitches when it's top stitching, you may want to use a thread that blends in. Also, you may have noticed that I'm only sewing at the moment on the right side of my tape. I find it easier to sew with my line here. So I'm just going to sew on the right side, and then I will turn it around and sew down the other side of the tape, also on the right side. For me personally, I just find it easier to line it up that way. I assume it's because I'm right-handed or something along those lines. And I started in the middle of the project so that there is less likelihood of bunching. If I start at one side and work my way over, then I may get some bunching as I get to one end. Just 2 more on the right side going this way. lots of tails. I'm going to flip it around, and we're going to go the right side again with it flipped 180 degrees. When you first start your quilting lines, it is worth checking after the first line if you're happy with your tension, in case you need to increase or decrease it to get a nice even stitch. You can just check, have a look at your stitches and make sure that you're happy with them, and if you feel that they're not pulling through evenly, then you can just adjust your tension accordingly. And when you get to these corner pieces, just keep going straight down there so that you still have that quilted look. Even though there's no foam under there, you still have that top stitch quilted look on the sides of your logi. So you can see here we have one direction of our quilting done, and if you want to be done here, you could take your painter's tape off and continue with your logi pouch. I'm going to quilt it also the other direction. It is curling up just a little bit, and when we quilt it this way, that will even out. But if you were going to go through and just complete your logi like this, you could just press that to try to get that to just smooth out a bit, but it's not too bad. If you're used to walking foot, you shouldn't have too much skewing of your vinyl there. So what we're going to do is we're going to move this painter's tape so that we can get our lines going the other way. Just the same way as we did for this direction. I'm just going to take my ruler, line it up with the edge, and place that tape down, reusing the same pieces of tape as I used for the first set of stitches. And if there's some little gaps at the end where the pieces were just not quite long enough, just add an extra little bit of tape at the end. And then the same way as we did for the other one, just tuck in those extra bits. We'll tear them off, and then we will sew down both sides of the tape. I will do only the right side and then flip it and do the right side again, but however you choose to do it is fine. That's just my personal preference. Checking again that your bobbin has enough thread and that you're happy with your tension. It's okay to snip these threads here because we back stitched, but we will do some fray check and trim them all once we've done the second set of lines. Back over at the sewing machine, making sure again that you have enough thread in your bobbin, that your stitch length is the same as you used for the first set of lines. Back stitching at the beginning and end. and just sewing next to the tape. We have all of those lines sewn now. Before I take the tape off, I just like to check from the back that I haven't missed any of the lines, as it's pretty easy with this many lines that you're sewing to just miss one. So just check that they're all there. And then I like to pull my threads tight at the end of each sewn line. And then we can peel off that painter's tape. Now what I like to do is take my fray check, and I'm just going to apply it at the ends of each of these lines of stitches. I'm going to let that dry, and then I will trim all of those threads. Just taking care when you're trimming that you don't nick into your exterior. With that all trimmed and the fray check dried, we can now work on the rest of our Logi. I am doing the lining version that has the binding today, but you can still do this with the lining that is the split version. Because we have the foam on the back there, this won't really work for the unlined version. Grab your tape and get it ready. I like to put a tiny snip to mark the middle. And then make the tiny snips into the tape about 1/4 inch just to help it go around the curve. I know a lot of people are hesitant to put snips into their zipper tape, which is why I put the fray check on it. You don't have to do it. You can use your zipper tape without putting the snips in. I just find it is so much easier to get it to hug the curve, and that's why I choose to do it that way. Take a look at the end of your zipper tape, see which tooth is further out, and put a little snip on that side. Same at the other end. Grab your double-sided tape, and we're going to apply it around the top and the bottom. I'm also going to mark my centers. By folding in half. The center bottom as well. I'm going to do the same on the lining piece. Working again from the exterior, remove the double-sided tape. We're going to center up our zipper. Pull that apart. Line the center of the tape up with the center of your exterior. And then working outwards, press that tape down onto the double-sided tape. Zipper teeth are face down on the exterior. Then I'm going to baste around the edge here at 1/8 inch. I've switched now from my walking foot to my zipper foot and just basting that with a long stitch length just to keep that zipper in place. Just pulling that tape out to that corner there, if it is pulled away a little bit. And doing the same for the other side. Trim your threads and grab your lining piece. Remove that double-sided tape. And then we're going to line up the center of the interior with the center of the exterior and line up the edges here and then press it around that curve. We are doing right sides together and the zipper is wrong side up to the lining. Then you can just grab some clips and just pop those on the curves to help it stay together even better at those trickier points where the zipper just wants to pull everything apart. When you are sewing around your logi, I recommend putting your thinner material down on your feed dogs, as that will help it to feed through more evenly so that your corners line up. So I'm going to be sewing lining side down, starting at one edge. I'm going to be using my zipper foot as a guide to make my seam allowance nice and even. And I will be sewing at 5/16 of an inch, but anywhere from 5/16 to 3/8. The most important thing being that your seam allowance is even. So I use the width of my zipper foot, line this edge up with the edge of my fabric and go around, and also making sure that you're keeping all of your layers flush at the edge here. Back stitching well at the beginning and the end. Using a shorter stitch length. And go all the way around. Making sure that your zipper is not bunching up underneath. If you can feel it, just push it out of the way slightly. Trim those threads or melt them if you have gotten yourself a thread zapper. Then we're going to snip the curves here so that they poke out nicely. Again, if you do not feel comfortable snipping into your zipper tape, that is perfectly fine. Just know that it will affect the finished look of your pouch. And also, don't snip your lines from the quilting. We'll be putting fray check on each of these snips. Just around the peak of the curve. And just snipping about 3/16 of an inch, and definitely not beyond the stitch line that we just made. So if you see here, this is my seam that we just sewed, and this is my snip. So quite shallow compared to where that seam is, and then we'll put fray check here, particularly at the tip there, as that is where it would start to fray from. And I just put a drop in at the point and let that soak in to seal those threads where we've snipped them. And I also like to do it where we snipped the middle of the zipper, and then wait for that to dry. Straight in the tip of that triangle. While that's drying, grab your little pieces for your binding. Mine are 4 inches by 1. Just fold it in half. And just press that. If you have a seam roller, you can use that, or you can iron it. You need to use non-fray material for this, or if you are using something like a cotton woven, you'll need to do a double fold and fold it over at the end also so that it doesn't fray. Now we're going to turn this out through the opening here. I like to start from the corner using my thumbs to poke it out. And then put your hand all the way inside and poke those corners out nicely. I like to just pull on the zipper a little to really get that seam to pop out. If you have a point turner, you can run it in there, particularly if you have one of the ones with a round end. This style, you can pop that inside and just use that to smooth that corner out and really get it to sit out nicely. Before we top stitch, I like to finger press or grab my seam roller just to really get those creases to sit nice and flat. We'll get a nice even top stitch and a nice straight zipper. The top stitching will help with that too. Okay, set up to the machine and get that top stitched. I've now got my Teflon foot on, and I will be using this part of the Teflon foot lined up with this part of my vinyl to get a nice even stitch line. When I have my needle in the far left position, that gives me a seam allowance of 1/8 of an inch, which is what I like to use for my top stitching. So take a look at your machine and see which settings you want to use. But I like to use part of the presser foot to make sure I get a nice consistent seam line. Use the same length stitch as you used for your quilting. And I like to use the same color thread, so it's a nice cohesive look. I'm going to start just in the side here. And because we're doing the binding version, we can sew around this whole pouch in one go and close up these side bits as well, which will help us when we are lining up our box corners. Back stitch. Check your tension and keep going around the whole way. And I just like to pull slightly on that zipper as I go around the edge just to make sure that I'm really getting a nice fold in that vinyl. Continuing around this corner here, just make sure that your lining and your exterior are as well lined up as you can get them. When I'm going around the curves, I like to take it nice and slowly and do about 2 stitches at a time before I pivot my presser foot. And that helps me get a nice gradual curve in my top stitch. So coming up to this curve, I just will slow down as it starts to curve, pivot ever so slightly, 2 stitches, pivot ever so slightly, 2 stitches, pivot again, 2 stitches, and now I'm on the straightaway. Coming to the corner again, making sure the lining and the exterior are well lined up, and finishing back up where we started. We now need to get our zipper pulls on. So I'm just going to melt the ends of my zipper with my lighter. Grab my zipper pull, and working from the side that we marked earlier, we are going to put on our zipper pulls. We're going to do it this way, upside down, but your zipper tape is still facing you. So looking at the side where the tooth is further out, you're going to take your pull and you're going to slide it on until you can just about see the zipper teeth at the end of that zipper head. Take the other side, you're going to slide it up just below the first side. Then you're going to take your left hand and slide it down till you feel them click, and then pushing the base of that zipper head, you're going to slide it on and pull it through. The zipper wants to pull apart because of the shape of the pouch, so just hold on to it and pull it through and take a look at your zipper. And you can see that this zipper tooth is still further out and there's no gap, so you know that that one is on correctly. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side, flipping it over. And on this one, this side is further out. That's the one that we have marked, so we know. Take your zipper head, and because this side was further out, we're going to start from the right-hand side. Slide the pull on. Keep the teeth just inside that zipper head. Take the left-hand side, feed it up. When they touch, pull the right-hand side down until you feel them click, and then push from the base of that zipper head. You can sometimes tell that they're not quite lined up, so you can adjust as needed. And then as you pull on, this zipper tooth is further out than this one, but there's no gaps, which is correct because this is the side we started from. So we know that zipper head is in the right spot. And when you slide it up all the way, you will see that there are no gaps and that your tape is nice and smooth, so you know you've got a good install. I do have a video that goes into that in a lot more detail if you wanted to check that out. I will pop a link for you. Now we're nearly done. We're going to box our corners. So fold this corner down and you should have a nice straight line here. Your boxed corners should have a nice flat edge with no side sticking further out. I'm going to put a staple in there, but you can use clips. Staple on either side. And on the other side, folding it down. The notch we marked earlier lines up with the center of your zipper. Staple here within the seam allowance on this side. And then I'm going to go and sew along here at 3/8 of an inch, backstitching well at either end, and that's going to close up the bottom of the bag. Before I sew these edges closed, I just like to check inside to make sure that deep in this corner here, none of my exterior is bunched up. Because we have sewn that edge when we were top stitching, it shouldn't bunch up, but just in case, I like to check before I sew through it. As I'm sewing here, I'm just going to be careful of the prongs of those staples that I've put in, and just put a slight bit of pressure here to keep that zipper nice and flat and make sure that my boxed edge, my boxed corners stay nicely lined up. Using a shorter stitch length because we're constructing, and 3/8 of an inch back stitching at the beginning and the end. If you want to, you can reinforce a little extra over that zipper tape. Then repeat on the other side. You can also reinforce in this line of stitches. Pull those staples out. We're also going to trim our threads, trim our zipper, and then I'm going to melt the end of my zipper. You can also put fray check on the end of your zipper if you don't want to use a lighter. You want to make sure that the zipper is cut flush with your lining because we are going to be putting that binding over the top of it. Just melt any little threads if you want to. Now grab your binding pieces and some clips, and we're just going to fold that over that raw seam. And now we're just going to sew along this edge back stitching at 3/8 of an inch. I like to use an in-between stitch length when I am sewing the binding. The seam is already sewn with the seam that we did here when it had the raw edge. So you don't need to do it as short as your construction stitch length. So you could do a top stitching stitch length if you wanted to. I usually split the difference. Stop when you get to the edge of the bag, not the edge of the binding. It does have some overhang that we're going to trim. Back stitch and pull that off. Make sure you're pulling your threads nice and tight. Repeat on the other side. And we are almost done here. I'm just going to trim the corner of that binding piece. I like to fold it over so I can see where the edge of the bag is, and then just snip it in the same direction, trimming my threads at the same time, taking care not to snip through the main part of the bag. And then I will go back through with my thread zapper and just melt those last little remaining threads. And now we can turn it out. Open your zipper out just to make it easier on yourself. Again, going from the corners as I want to do. Poke it out. And there you have it. There is your quilted logi. So you can do different widths for your stitch lines. The painter's tape works really well to give you a nice even quilted look. It's very easy to do. You get to practice your top stitching. It doesn't damage the vinyl underneath, and it gives you a really unique elevated look for your logi pouch. Hope that helps. Thanks everyone.